We're going to start our last talk of the morning session by Reverend George Handzo. He's widely regarded as one of the foremost authorities on the deployment and practice of professional healthcare chaplaincy, and he's a director of Health Services Research and Quality and Healthcare Chaplaincy Network and president of Handzo Consulting. He oversees projects devoted to the strategic assessment, planning, and management of chaplaincy services. He's authored over 70 chapters and articles. He's been a foremost leader of the field. The Crusaders, I call this three speakers Crusaders for the meaning and use of spirituality in healthcare system. Thank you.
No, I think I'm okay. Can you hear me? Yes. And I'm used to speaking without a mic, as my people who here know me know. So because I usually override mics. So I can see the chaplain in the room are laughing. But so a couple of things. I'm honored to be here. My pastoral heart ached, and then I had to confess at the beginning of Dr. Bayak's talk. Not for Dr. Bayak, because I know he can handle this, but for Diana, who's the tech person. There is no more exposed position in the world than to stand in front of an audience, trying to figure out this while knowing that everybody in the room is right here. So let's get ready. The other thing, my other confession is that I talked a lot to Dr. Levetsky about this, and I think I was on the 101 a couple of times when she called me, and I thought, oh, well, this is great. You know, I can do this. Sounds good. You know, I'm in town that weekend. It's 20 minutes away from my house. I can do this. It's fine. And then some months later, when all the paperwork was signed and I couldn't really get out of it anymore, I got the agenda. And what does it say as I open the agenda? That I'm following Christina Pahalski and Ira Beichel. Well, I must have a past life where I probably did some really bad things. And I obviously haven't atoned for all of them yet. So, because I figured, now, you know, what's going to be left good to say by the time I get to the podium? Not much, probably. Fortunately, I presented with Christina a lot of times, and I know the questions where she's going to say, well, George was going to answer this when he gets up here. So it's a team approach that she and I have worked on over the years. So I'm ready for this. Anyway, and I'm also from North Jersey. A few miles, we were born in towns a few miles apart, and I grew up in the construction trades in New Jersey, pouring concrete, so I can do this too. I never asked about that. I was told, pour the concrete, get out. So here's the process, and frankly, I could do a couple of slides and stop, because this really echoes what we've already heard from Dr. Pahalski and Dr. Bayak, and you're going to hear me echo. One of the things I didn't do is put a lot of research in, because I figured I was going to, quote, be able to cite what they'd already quoted, and that's going to work really nicely. So this is about some really simple things. Cultural integrity, cultural humility, cultural sensitivity, but it's really a takeoff on what Dr. Pahalski and Dr. Bayak, and a specification of what they've already talked about. Create a faith-friendly environment. And the judge of that, as Dr. Bayak has reminded us, is the patient, not us. What I consider faith-friendly is irrelevant unless I become the patient. That becomes very relevant. But it is about, does the patient perceive this as an environment, this healthcare institution, as an environment where they can be who they are? And that includes their ethnicity, their gender identification, their culture, all of that. It's about being culturally sensitive. We used to talk about culturally competent. That is impossible. It's an impossible task. The best thing we can do is to understand that we do not understand. And we're going to get to that. And what we do understand, or think we understand, is probably our assumptions and our biases, which we need to check at the door. And then it's about listening. And to cite a couple of things one that Dr. Polsky presented well, and one I think she underplayed dramatically. I had the great fortune, although I didn't consider it that at the time, when I took, the chaplains in the room will understand when I say, when I took CP when I was in seminary, clinical pastoral education training, the person who led my theological integration seminar is here now. Now, you saw the comment about, so you know what I got taught about listening. It took me a long time to learn it. I'm not sure I completely have still. But Henry was, Dutch, and he was quite definite. He would stop. No, 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 no. You do not listen. So I think it's about listening. And the part that Dr. Polsky underplayed was about the patient with the tear in her eye at the end of the day, because it is so easy to look at your computer, to literally not see that tear, to not hear that change of voice that both Dr. Polsky and Dr. Bayek are so good at. When a patient starts to say something, and Dr. Polsky has said to me many times, you have to, or I've heard him say, you have to know that you hear, and you all of a sudden have to understand that it is time to stop looking at your computer screen, turn your chair, and look at this patient and attend to what they are doing. That's listening. So I think that's really that you can, if I thought lunch was out there, you could go to lunch now, but you can't because there's more. The end game, and I'm always into an end game. What is the end game? The end game is a healthcare institution where patients, family members, and staff, because the care that the staff gives the patient will be reflective of the care that we give each other as staff members. The staff can live out their spiritual and religious values and practices within the bounds of mutual respect and safe healthcare practice. That doesn't mean anything goes. I remember I worked, I covered a pediatric oncology unit for 23 years. Yeah, I know. And I'm fine. But they sent me to see a family, they wanted to, the child was dying, and they wanted to kill a chicken and swing it around their head. Which I understood culturally. Infectious disease had some negative reaction. I can't imagine why. But in a place where, all the patients were immunosuppressed. So we had to work that out about what was the equivalent for that. So there are bounds. But there's a mindset. And I think one of the mindsets, and I'm going to talk about the culture of healthcare in a minute, but one of the mindsets of healthcare is around being risk averse. In other words, there's always a question of why should we do this? Why should we do it? And if we can avoid doing it, we should. Because maybe somebody will be upset. The proper question is why not? Is there really a reason here why we would not do this for this patient or this family? And a lot of the times there is not. And so it's about customer service and patient engagement and all of that stuff. So, as I said, being culturally sensitive does not mean knowing everything about every culture. It is instead, it's respecting differences, it's eagerness to learn, and a willingness to accept that there are many ways of viewing the world. One of the things that we have to get over, and I don't think chaplaincy is unique in this aspect. I think all of our schooling process, medical school, social work school, it's the same thing. That you come out and you go to this class, you know, and it's, this is the way you will do this. This is the way you will think about this, right? And so we get people into chaplaincy, and I was one at one point, who, and I see them in the office. They come back to the office, they talk to this patient, and they say, they've got a lousy theology. And I, you know, and I am a Jersey boy, and so I say to them, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that God has spoken to you and has given you the one true way of relating. Well, but our professor in seminary, well, yeah, okay. The authority on the theology is this patient you just talked to, not your professor in seminary. And it's your job to make that happening. And one of the ways we can always tell when we're doing not so good pastoral care, or cultural care for that matter, is when you even are tempted to use the word but or however in your response to the patient. The patient says something, and if you're tempted to say but, don't. It's about listening to them. This is about their theology, not yours. And they have something to teach you. And, you know, it's what works for them that, so the first thing is our own predispositions. And some of these we come by culturally, and some we learn by being in the healthcare system. So what causes illness? What did we learn growing up? And we think, you know, in this country that everybody learned about germs, and, you know, we all really believe that. Well, you know, in our business that a lot of people still, you get that, but they might not be sure about that, and they may be looking for something else. True story that I learned from. We were admitting a patient in the pediatric oncology unit who was a small child, the child of two, this was Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, two Memorial employees, a nurse and a ICU tech. And the pediatrician, who was a gruff guy, always around like this, oh God. And he sat down with the family, and I sat down with them, and he said to them, now these are trained, scientifically trained people, and he said to them, the first thing I want to tell you, I don't know what, we don't have a diagnosis yet, but the first thing I want to tell you, and you have to hear, is nothing you did as a part of this job, nothing that happened to you in this job caused this illness to your child. Magical, and they went, oh. And I went, oh my goodness. I missed that one totally. And then they could hear, bottom line, the child did not have a cancer. Had a blood disorder that was easily curable and wasn't leukemia. But the kind of insight to say, these are scientifically trained people, you would assume that they get it about what causes disease. They did not. I mean, they do in their heads. But this wasn't about in their head. So what does it mean to be a good patient? This is an attitude. Now, I'm sure this isn't true of you personally, but we hear this all the time. What is a good patient? A good patient is the patient who's compliant, who does what we want them to do, and who takes the treatment that we want them to take. Right? And this is still true at the end of life. despite the efforts of people like Dr. Baya, particularly for generations now, it seems, and Dr. Kowalski, to get us to think otherwise, we still, at the end of life, still think, well, they're not a good patient. They don't want to take their pain med. They don't want to, the family is grieving all the time. The family, they need to get over that. And we need to be thinking better and listening better to what is going on. And what did you grow up? When you were sick, little, what messages did you get from your family about what being a good patient was about? And from whom? How to treat illness and injury. I grew up, despite the fact that I was born in North Jersey, my father got out of there pretty quickly, and much to the dismay of his 5 sisters, who thought that was treason, to move out of North Jersey and move to the country. But we lived across about 100 yards of lawn from my maternal grandmother and grandfather. And I still remember, as sick as I was, my mother, we called her Mom, and we had 2 moms, kind of. We didn't seem confusing to me. I grew up with that. And my mother would say, go across to Mom and she'll tell you what to do. I would walk across the lawn. And Mom would give me something. We didn't question what it was. That was not allowed. And that would make me better. And I would walk back across the lawn. So that was where we went to. It was very clear. Is it really whatever works for the patient? I mean, this has been a question of palliative care and hospice care, I think, ethically for a long time now. Are there limits on what if it works to the patient? Dr. Kowalski told a very poignant story of a patient who wanted medication to hasten her death. And that was not, the patient thought that was going to work for her, but it was a limit to which Dr. Kowalski was not willing to go. What is wrong? Is there a wrong treatment? Is there a wrong thing to do? When you're working in pediatrics, I mean, this is kind of a constant question. Because you always have a recourse, which is to report this family to Child Protective Services. And that's not a hard alternative to enact, frankly, in most states. But to what extent is that allowable for patients? And at what point do we allow the patient, the child, to be involved? That depends on culture. You really have to think and you have to listen. True story. Family, 4-year-old child, dying. Pretty much what we would call in our space actively dying, which is a euphemism for it's going to be sooner rather than later. And the child suddenly got cantankerous. It had been a good patient. He was now cantankerous. He was now resistant. He was not cooperative. And we finally, she wanted to take him home. We finally encouraged the mother, with our support, agreed to tell him that he was terminally ill. To which he said, when she told him, well, geez, you could have told me that a week ago. Let's go. I want to go home. You tell me I'm going to die, I don't stay here. He was 4. Now, not every 4-year-old's going to do that, I think. But I think my point is, oh no, he's 4, you can't talk to him, developmentally, he won't have a concept of death until he's 12, and blah, 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 and all that. Well, we need to listen to this child. We know this child very well by now, and we need to listen, and we need to take it seriously. Aspects of culture. So this, I think you can read it a little bit. This is just to impress you with how integrated culture is to the worlds in which we live. Whether it's our place of employment, our company, our healthcare system, we have standardized culture that's not, doesn't have to be that way. It is the way the culture is. We have beliefs. We believe in the omnipotence of technology generally. We have practices. Annual physical exams, diagnostic procedures. There's a diagnostic category Dr. Bayab talked about, and each one of those has a set of tests and assessments that come with it before you can say that this patient has this disease. The ones that I like, that this is, I didn't make this up by the way, so habits, charting is a habit. Did you know that? Use of medical jargon. And of course we in chaplaincy have our own jargon. And a lot of it gets into chart notes that makes them unreadable even by me, actually, a lot of the time. Let alone by a non-theologically trained person. We like promptness, we like neatness, and we like compliance. We do not like patients who are late, irrespective of why. We don't like people who are not compliant, and we don't like stuff that's not where it's supposed to be. We dislike tardiness and disorderliness, and we have customs, and we have rituals, physical examinations, surgical procedures, etc. So here's some aspects of culture just to think about, and there are a lot of these, but the overall message here is, and again these slides will be available, but the overall message here is to think about how many aspects of this there are to think about with a person that you are caring for, or a fellow staff member. Sense of self and space. Handshake. We teach chaplaincy students, one of the things you never do is offer your handshake to a person of the opposite gender, ever, until they reach out to you, until and unless. Too many times, that's going to put them in a very uncomfortable position. And you don't know, you can't tell. Communication, explicit and direct versus indirect and implicit. And this is a common one. Some people talk in indirect communication. It's where I grew up, it's pretty direct and pretty succinct. There's not much question about it. So that's what I like. So I have trouble with indirect communication because I was never taught to interpret it very well. Although I actually got it schooled out of me because I then left New Jersey and went to a fairly elite New England boarding school for 3 years, where they majored in indirect communication, especially in the dining room table, where the master and his wife, we called teachers masters then, which was just apt, and they majored in indirect communication, and if you didn't learn the rules, it was really problematic. So, dress and appearance, especially when some of the dress is religious or cultural in nature. There, we had a patient who was Rastafarian, and he, which even in New York is a fairly rare breed of person, and he needed, I forget what, but he needed some surgery where they were going to have to shave part of his head. And he was very resistant, and it took a long time. I don't know whether it was because it was a male-female thing or a gender or racial thing, but he was reticent to tell the staff why he was resisting the surgery. He didn't want to get his head shaved because his hair was like here. That was very important to him in his faith tradition, that this was sacred to him. The same thing with jewelry. Some jewelry just religiously simply does not come off. I mean, or shouldn't be taken off, let's put it that way. It can be taken off. So what can you do? Can you send it, what can you do in the OR? We have at least one surgeon sitting in the audience, I know. But, what can you do about that? Are there ways to make that, rather than just say, no, you can't have that, he's got to take that jewelry off. Is there a way, before we do that, to work around that? Eating. Dining is a social experience. We hear a lot about this if you read some of the accounts from the people who do community outreach for our military in places like Iraq. And I spent some time working for the United States Navy, and so I get involved in this with chaplains. And they talk about how you can't just go into the village and just say, we're going to do this now, and we're going to give you that, and then it doesn't happen, and they wonder why. Well, because you have to sit and have tea for 2 hours, and you have to observe the protocol, and you have to learn about this ritual that is there. I grew up. I'm family secret. I'm known for eating standing up, it's just what I grew up with. I can eat wandering around in the house, and often do. So, to the annoyance of my family, and to a Buddhist practice, mindfulness eating, I have failed. Dr. Byer, just let's not go there. But it's a practice for a lot of people. Linear and exact time consciousness, where time is money. Years ago, my wife and I think we were still living in Brooklyn, and we lived in Brooklyn. Our children were born in Brooklyn, and we went to a wedding of a colleague of mine. The wedding we knew was going to be in another culture that was not ours. And so we went, and again, typical of me, we arrived 15 or 20 minutes early to call time of the wedding. We walk into the church is dark. There is not a soul there. And we were like, did we come the wrong day? Half an hour or so later, the flowers get delivered. An hour or an hour and a half, the people start to arrive. The bridal party eventually comes. The church is full. Somebody turns the lights on. There's a wonderful wedding. I was having a panic attack. I thought I got there, the wrong day. Because, normal Christian services start, but...
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but you just said normal.
Right. The normal for me.
Right.
Thank you. Good call. Good catch. You're right. It's not normal.
It's not normal.
No. And if you live in Los Angeles or you live in New York City, what is that? Anyway, yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
I'm an anthropologist.
Yeah, I got that. I know that. I heard that before. Good. Keep piping up. No, I think we've heard a couple times. And you know, again, what happened there is you just saw my bias come out. Right? You just saw it. And what I consider normative for where I grew up. Relationships, and I think this is, I think this values and norms and the beliefs and attitudes, I think is critical, because I want to get that, and then I want to, actually I want to do this while I'm going to go back forward. We have one of the unwritten rules in American healthcare. It's not so unwritten, actually, is autonomy. And it is up to the patient. And I have been in more, debates with medical staff around consents, saying, well, she has to sign the consent. She's the patient. Well, no, in her culture, her son will sign. No, you can't, no, she has to sign. Well, no, she is not going to sign. I mean, you can yell all you want, she is not going to sign, because from her culture, she's a widow, her oldest son will come. Now, maybe if he tells her to sign, she might sign. Might. But you won't like it. Well, I don't know if the rules can, it's a distorted reality. So here's another piece. This is a system that I picked up from a colleague of mine, Larry Burton, from now retired, but at Rush Hospital in Chicago. And it's rather simple, and I really like it. But traditional is someone who basically their set of authority is external. So it's the patient who says to you, my pastor says, or scripture says, or the Quran says, and that's the way they do it. Negotiating is when we say, well, yes, we believe in scripture, we believe in the PDR, we believe in the diagnosis, but we want to apply our own wisdom and our own strength to that. The problem comes when we who are healthcare practitioners, the vast majority of us are negotiators. When we think we can negotiate with a traditionalist, you cannot do it. I mean, you can try to do it, but both parties will be very unhappy. So how, again, do you listen to the traditionalist and say, we're going to have to go with the son signing somehow? And what their custom is, because they're not going to conform to our custom. And then, there's these two mental processes of learning. There's linear thinking, and I'm a very linear thinker. I go from point A to point B, connect the dots, this dot, that dot, the next dot. When I have to deal with people who are not linear thinkers, I've learned to recognize them at least now, so I know who they are when I come up against them. But it becomes a real problem for me, because I really have trouble. I mean, I have real trouble, just no matter how much I try, understanding what they're trying to tell me. I do. And I really almost have to get it's like another language. I have to get somebody to interpret something for me sometimes, because I really don't understand it, and I can't follow it. But recognizing that is okay. And work habits, I think, again, is work, there for. So this model I like. I've never really seen a true individualist who doesn't rely on any authority but their own self, or doesn't have any wisdom or background. But I do think, the negotiating part is really critical. I mean, I have two dear chaplain friends. One of whom is an Orthodox rabbi, very conservative in all sorts of ways, and one is an imam, African American imam, also conservative. And you would think that these guys are going to be like oil and water. They're not. They're the best of friends. They go to ball games together. They hang out together. Why? They're both traditionalists. They see the world through the same lens about how the world works and why it works the way it does. They use different words to describe it often. But it is a funny scene because you see this about this tall Orthodox rabbi with the beard, with the very Brooklyn accent, walking down the street with this imam who's 6'5", African American from Mississippi, brought up a Baptist by his grandma, and they are the best buddies. It's the oddest couple you've ever seen in your life. So it's all about assessment, folks. Again, this is the other part of listening. This is the concretization of listening. And again, nobody's going to do a full, check off. This is like Dr. Pahalski said. This is not a checklist. Okay, it's not, because but it's listening for these things to say, what is that? There's a medal on the bed. What is that? What is that for? Or they're wearing a medal. To inquire after that. Curiosity is the secret here. Legitimate curiosity. People say, well, I can't ask. I don't want to be inquisitive. Be curious. Can you be curious? Because you care. And because you're trying to make it better for this patient. And I think the same with family structure. Modesty, of course, is something we have to, I worked on a pediatric oncology unit, so we had parents staying all the time. And we had a substantial Orthodox Jewish population. So we had a lot of Orthodox women sleeping over in the rooms, and I was the chaplain. Here I am, right? And it was tricky for me to do my work, but respect the modesty of these mothers, and certainly until I was sure they were up and they had their shidel on and they were dressed and they had their knees covered and all of that, I had to be very careful and aware that this was a problem, and also to make the medical staff aware, because I think we're teaching medical students better now, but we then had, chaplains too, but all of us kind of, you walk in and you go, the curtain is like, good morning, how are ya? Wrong thing to do. So it's an assessment issue, and the assessment is ongoing. I mean, it isn't necessarily, okay, I've done that now, check this, I know, I'm done. There's a distinction between stereotypes and cultural patterns. It's a fine line. Knowing about cultural patterns, like I said, not reaching out your hand is very important. When it becomes a stereotype and it colors your ability to be open to what you're hearing in front of you, that is a stereotype, and you need to get rid of it. So tips. One of my pet peeves is I still have people, even some people who teach cultural humility, say, just treat patients like you'd want to be treated. No, no, no. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Because a lot of them don't want to be treated like you would want to be treated, potentially. And they're not going to do it the way you were taught to do it. I once heard a Japanese American woman teaching cultural humility, and she told the story of she was brought up in a fairly traditional Japanese American home in the U.S., and she was taught again and again and again over her lifetime to not make eye contact with adults in authority. That was a cardinal rule of her household. So then she went to school. And it wasn't long in school before she got in somebody's way about something she didn't understand. And the teacher called her up to the front of the room and started berating her, and she had her eyes down, and she said, "Look at me when I'm talking to you. What's wrong with you? Don't you have any respect?" And she was totally, she was dissolved. She had no idea what to do, because it was against every fiber of her being to make eye contact with that adult. And so I think, you know, but I'm sure that's what the teacher taught her children or whatever, and that's fine. That's what I was taught too. Address adult patients by their surnames unless you're given permission to do otherwise. Familiarity and the informality that we use in healthcare often is a Western, Anglo-European thing. It is not respectful to a lot of patients. Not. From a lot of, especially older adults, especially men, but in general, not appropriate. Until they give you permission, and then it's fine. And it's okay to say, Mr. Smith, how would you prefer I call you? What name would you prefer me to use for you? Fine. And he may say, you know, call me John. Great. Okay, there you go. Mind your tone of voice. Again, the loud thing is not, you know, is an American trait. Each culture has its own rules about touching. I think giving information and asking about it, there's been a lot of discussion in the literature about that. There are things called talk back, where you get the patient to, the family member to tell you, but asking them, do they understand? First of all, in many cultures, will get you a yes even when they don't. It doesn't tell you much. Secondly, it's not respectful. It seems like we're talking. People are being talked down to. That's the way it feels on the other end. And informed consent forms and regulations can be extremely upsetting and frightening to people. You don't know what their ability is to read. I sat on an IRB for 18 years, and part of my job was to raise my hand and say, guys, you know, I've been here for 10 years or 12 years, and I've read a lot of consent forms, and I have no idea what this consent form says. Well, but it's read, it's 8th grade, it checks out, it's 8th grade level, that's what we're required to do. I don't know what it said. I can't read it. If I can't read it, I bet you that a lot of your patients can't read it. I bet you. So we need to do something about, you know, checking that out and the way, again, it's a formality that we have. Different is different. It's not right or wrong. And we need to be very clear in our own minds about that. Don't be concerned about something you don't, a religion you don't understand. Patients want you to ask. They want you to be, by and large, they want you to be inquisitive and curious. As long as it's curious and not an interrogation. And not, you know, Dr. Pahalski will tell you, not with a clipboard in front of you, like, okay, what is your religion? Yeah, okay, and what, you know, yeah, I can't imagine what happened when you learned that Epic was in a checkbox system. I'm glad I wasn't there. Don't be afraid to ask. If you don't know, ask. And it's especially true at the end of life, I think. And it's particularly hard because at the end of life, a lot of people are understandably and culturally often not willing to discuss what their beliefs and rituals are at the end of life because it's considered a bad thing to do. It's considered something that brings on death, and so they won't do it. But so you may have to do that on the fly at the last minute. But it is something that's important to do. Don't assume that they're going to want a given ritual when they don't, because maybe they don't, but you don't want to make it seem like they should. Well, aren't you supposed to do this in your religion? Oh, gee, should I be doing that? Gee, well, maybe I'll call my clergy person or something. They need to do what makes them comfortable. This is just about family meetings. Dr. Kowalski said this too. I'm working on a quality improvement project. You'll love this. In a military installation, and we're trying to increase referrals. And one of the things we're running up against is that the practitioners are afraid that we're actually going to make them do religious counseling. On the flyer that we're distributing, this wasn't my idea. It was the commander who's in charge. In big letters at the top, it says something like, "Nothing in this protocol should lead you to believe that you're going to have to discuss religion with the patient," or something like that. And because, in fact, we really don't want them to. Dr. Kowalski was exactly right. It's always about when you refer. And this is about assessing, it's about listening, it's about being present, it's about dignity and respect. And at the end of life. So I just last summer, finally, after all these many years, got trained in something called dignity therapy. Put together by our colleague, Harvey Chachinov, psychiatrist in Winnipeg, because Harvey discovered, working with dying patients, that one of the things that was really a driver of people's desire for hastened death was not pain, physical pain. It was the sense that they were not being treated with dignity and respected. And so this, what he calls a therapy, I actually think it's not a therapy. I think it's a legacy thing. It's helping people tell their story. It's what Dr. Bai was talking about. It's about what Dr. Kowalski was talking about. It's about sitting there with somewhat of a script of questions, but having them talk about what gave meaning to their life. What were the parts that they want somebody else to remember about them? What are the pictures that they have of raising their children or mentoring people at work that are important to them? And that document is then transcribed and it's written and it's given back to them, and they can do what they want with it, but it is there for them to pass down to their friends. But I knew this intellectually, but doing some of this and reading the transcript of other investigators who are doing this has really impressed me with how powerful that intervention is, which is simply sitting with this patient and saying, "Tell me your story. Let me help you tell your story about what's meaningful to you and what's been important to you. And we're going to put it down for you to, others to remember you by." It's unbelievably powerful. How hard is that? Hardest thing is it takes time. That's the hardest, which we don't take mostly, and even for chaplains. Kowalski says it's true. And so I think it's not about negotiating. It's about religion. It's not about that. It's putting down what the patient says to you and respecting that and giving it place. And you don't have to help them find meaning. If you're present with them and you help them to tell their story, they will find their meaning for themselves consciously, because it's inside them. You don't have to give it to them. In fact, that would be a bad idea. They have it. And it's good. It's good. And the gift we can give them of whatever culture they are, if we can get beyond that, is to help them bring that meaning to consciousness, so that they can rejoice in it before they die, as part of their dying, yes, but it becomes part of that. My longtime colleague at Memorial, Bill Breitbart, has been worked with Harvey Tachino for many years, is now head of psycho-oncology at Memorial, has been working on a concept called meaning-centered therapy for some years that I participated and was honored to participate in the project. And it's about, I call it, I'll tell you what I call it and then I can explain it. I call it John Kabat-Zinn meets Meditatio Deo. It's merging the Buddha's concept of meditation, but meditating on the script of the Psalms in a way that Meditatio Deo, or what Dr. Pahalski said, would do. And coming out of that comes the meaning to this scripture. We would use the Psalms for it mostly, but it is a way to help people, again, in this case, find meaning through the Psalms. And the Psalms are wonderful because pretty much in the Psalms you can find just about any emotion, any terrible, horrible, joyful thing that you want to find, because that's what human beings are. And so I think, and then there are cases. Dr. Pahalski, I was remembering, will remember this day. We taught an hour for palliative care physicians on how to deal with patients who want miracles. And first of all, it was a challenge to get this in an hour. We didn't quite know how we were going to do it. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning at the academy, on Saturday, because that's when they thought this topic was really merited, the last day of the conference, we had, 700 people show up, 700 docs around the walls. But I think again, the lesson, the fear was, what do we do? Oh, they mentioned a miracle. Well, first of all, you need to listen because you don't know exactly what they mean by that. You think you know what you mean by it, but you don't know what they know, in their culture and their theology. And you'll be surprised. It's often not a let be. But more than that, it's about getting them to, you assess, and so you hear them, you hear God will decide, you hear I'm being punished, and then you listen to that. And maybe at the end they've come to terms with it already and you don't need to get me up there. But maybe you do. And that's the diagnostic distinction. But don't get thrown by it. It's a lot. And the other one, we're actually rewriting the NCCN guidelines now just to mess you up in your slides. But one of the things that Ken Parham has discovered in his work is that there's a bigger incidence of demonic voices, even outside the mental health, than we had imagined. We just have never heard it before because we weren't listening for it in healthcare. And so that's coming into the assessment categories now. This is just a couple of resources, and you can get them. These are free online. One is Joy Commission, one is on our website. And I'll warn you ahead of time, don't write me and say, this culture or this religion of mine wasn't on there, because the thing you're going to get back from me is we don't put anything on unless somebody from that culture or that religious group writes it for us, because otherwise we don't consider it valid. So you're going to get a note back from me and say, and if you want to write one, we'll be very happy to include it in there. And we're serious about that. The outline's there, but you're welcome to that, and you're welcome to email me. I want to just take, if I can, because this isn't on the slides, but I found this was sent to me this week, and I think it's perfect. Many of you may know the work of Don Berwick, former president of the Institute of Healthcare Improvement and former secretary of Health and Human Services. Really one of the gurus in patient-centered care, and sensitivity, I would say, in our culture. And Don writes this: "What chills my bones is indignity. It is the loss of influence on what happens to me. It is the image of myself in a hospital gown, homogenized, anonymous, powerless, no longer myself. It is the sound of a nurse calling me Donald, which is a name I never use. Don, or for him or her, Dr. Berwick would be appropriate. Is the voice of the doctor saying we think instead of I think, and thereby placing that small verbal wedge between himself as a person and myself as a person." Your language is critical here. How often do we say, well, we think? I'm going to skip. That's what scares me, to be made helpless before my time, to be made ignorant when I want to know, to be made to sit when I wish to stand, to be alone when I need to hold my wife's hand, to eat what I do not wish to eat, to be named what I do not wish to be named, to be told when I wish to be asked, to be awoken when I wish to sleep. Call it patient-centeredness, but I suggest this is the core. It is that property of care that welcomes me to assert my humanity and my individuality. If we be healers, then I suggest that it is not a route to a point, it is the point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, no. I thought you would all rally me with a snack before, but
Any questions?
You mentioned something about demonic voices.
yes. Demonic voices, he said. You mentioned, yes, I did. Some of the literature, Ken Pargaman is now retired, but one of the great researchers in our field of spirituality and health from Bowling Green, and his work suggests that the issue of demonic voices as being people's attributed cause to what happened to them is much more of a common occurrence, even in our American population, the U.S. population, than had been imagined. And so it's going to be included in the NCCN diagnosis, that, which is really going to make clinicians uncomfortable. But it makes me uncomfortable, but it is what it is.
Speaking a little more about that, I read a little bit on near-death experiences. I know that this does happen, but it's not. So is it maybe related to?
You know, I'm not ready to comment. If you're Kenneth Pargaman, I can go look for the study, but they've done some. They were testing. I think they were testing an instrument for spiritual distress or something, and they were trying to validate. They were doing a qualitative study, ground theory study, to find out what the themes were that they should include in that opt-out. Pardon.
What metrics do you think we need to measure in our healthcare?
I hear a disembodied voice. Yes.
So what metrics do you think we need to incorporate in our healthcare systems to actually try to measure quality?
Yeah.
Make sure that people are well trained for their roles.
Sure.
And we're accomplishing the goals from the perspective of the patient.
Well, we could get Dr. Byack up here and give him another 2 hours. And we would learn all about that. But let me give it the 30-second answer from my perspective. I think it's not quite clear, because I know what we have to do is we have to get 1 or 2. You know, I can't give you 50. I think I would start, you know, we don't know a lot about outcome measures yet, but I would do process measures to start. I would do you ask a spiritual screening question? You know, because that's what starts this ball rolling. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to measure anything. And there's lots of, I could give you a half an hour at least, maybe more, on spiritual screening questions that go in the medical record. To replace, do you want to see a chaplain, by the way? Get that out, put this one in. And we're being facetious about that, but there really is literature that suggests that people who say yes to the do you want to see a chaplain person are the persons who are least likely to be in spiritual distress. And so you're missing the population, and we chaplains wind up having some very nice conversations with, Mrs. Jones about how wonderful her pastor is and how they're taking such good care of her. Isn't God great? Fine, but that's not helpful. So I would think that. I would start with the process measure. I would start with, and then the structural measure. Do you have a board-certified chaplain, paid on staff, designated to respond to these things? Yes, no. And because then you need the troops to respond to the referrals that are going to come with that. That would be my first two. We're actually working on the three palliative care databases in the U.S. are combining. And so there's an opportunity for us to put some spiritual care questions in, and that's kind of where we are at the moment with those two. I don't know how much we're going to get, but yeah.
Thank you so much. So at the risk of, so as an anthropologist, there's a lot of anthropology literature about this cultural competencies model.
Yeah.
And there were some things that I really appreciated that came out today, like the slide about the cultural models embedded in the systems, in the medical system, because often what happens is that we end up assuming other people who are,
right,
have culture, and we don't. We as white, people or whatever, the medical system don't. And there's so much privilege in that. But I was also troubled a little bit. Obviously I interrupted you at one point, but I was troubled by the laughter in our room, in this room. Like you talked about sort of having a chicken, the ritual of the chicken, and that got a laugh, and the imam and the rabbi got a laugh, and that troubled me, and for a lot of reasons. And I'm wondering, this is a big question that possibly I don't know that you can answer, but I'm thinking about the contrast between the first talk today and this idea of that was simply about presence,
right,
developing presence, versus, as in contrast to the cultural competency model, which I say it's a model that exists, and it's a model that we're all taught, when we go through the medical systems. But there's something about identifying difference that so often ends up sort of essentializing this difference, and we don't go in and say, tell me about your crucifix, what does that mean to you, or tell me about your tie, why are you wearing this thing around your neck? Not that anybody who's doing cultural competencies would hopefully have that attitude about anything, but there's something about this contrast between sort of identifying cultural difference and sometimes laughing about the chicken versus just being in presence with people. And so I have a bit of discomfort about some of the way the model itself comes out.
Well, I think it goes to what I said, passed quickly over about attitudes and knowledge and stereotypes. Okay, and that's what I think part of what you're saying, and you're right. And that's not an easy line to define. And so you're pointing to a real issue. And when it crosses the line, is difficult. And I think we need both. I think we need to know about these cultures because it informs what we do. I think there are we work on a model called evidence-based practice, okay? And evidence-based practice, some people think it's just about the research and the numbers. It's not. It's supposed to be a three-legged stool. And the three-legged stool is research, what's called clinical wisdom often, and patient values. And for a stool to work, those things have to be, they can't be like this, right? So the question is, you know, if we let research or stereotypes crowd out the values, the stool is going to fall over. And so yes, but that's an eternal balance, and I think within a team we always have to keep calling each other on that. So I appreciate your comment. It's a real issue. Dr. Bach.
I just want to add my thoughts on this. In so many of the things that we teach, advanced care planning and communication workshops that we teach, we have to talk about cultural competency, right? It's actually a regulation. And I've gotten away from talking about cultural competency, and even cultural sensitivity is a nice term, but what I want to teach clinicians is coming in genuinely with a cultural curiosity.
Yeah.
Nobody is their perfect example of their upbringing, but I want to know how their cultural background and
Right.
the ethnicity or religion in which they were raised in, how that influences their life today, and within the context of caregiving or being ill oneself, how does that influence? So I come knowing that I can't know about their every discipline or set, but curious about them as an individual. And so I think we become culturally competent one patient and one family at a time.
Yeah, that's another way to do it. I agree.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.